I'm Lucy.
And I'm Darcy.
We're Year 7s at Nunnery Wood High School.
Me and Lucy love performing and are also interested in our local history.
So we were thrilled to get the opportunity to make a podcast about the workers at the Royal Worcester Porcelain Factory.
We signed up and before we knew it, jumped on a bus and went to the Museum of Royal Worcester.
We learnt so much, heard so many stories.
Already feeling like professionals, we got stuck into this project.
And now we can present to you
the 6th episode of our Porcelain podcast, and we're here to share with you some insights about working at the porcelain factory.
We've been working with an oral historian called Julia. In 2007, just before the factory closed down, she interviewed 35 workers.
Out of all of the intriguing stories Julia recorded, we've chosen to tell you about Stella and Dave Chambers, a married couple who worked at the factory.
We picked out Stella because she was a burnisher, and we didn't know what a burnisher was and wanted to find out more. Now we know that it is someone who polishes pottery and makes the gold bits shiny.
Stella's husband Dave had a completely different job at the factory. He packed and sent the pottery out of the factory.
Let's start with Stella. She was only a little bit older than us when she got her first job.
Can you imagine missing your school holidays to start work?
Well, that is exactly what Stella had to do.
I started when I was 15. I didn't have my school holiday. I started straight away. My auntie used to work at the casters. So I went then to Porcelain, had a job down there in the burnishers, and we used to work from 8 till 6. And we had a lady that was in charge of us was Miss Purser. First job I ever did was a box of Warm Street coffee cans, a whole box full, and it took me all day. I had to wet sand, that's like a piece of rag on your finger, dipping it into water, then into sand and going round. Then you had to dry sand it all with a chamois leather and silver sand. That was my first job, and I've never known such a long day. I was absolutely shattered, I was, and I was that bored of doing these cans all day, but they had to be just right. And if you left a bit of brown round the handle, she'd give you an agate stone, you had to pick all the little bits of brown out. And every piece we did, she inspected. Every single piece. She'd tell you off for leaving sand in the bottom of the cups. She'd keep on, more sand, get this sand out.
I would find that so frustrating, but to make the porcelain perfect, there would have to be no mistakes, so all of her work would eventually pay off.
So Stella didn't give up.
In fact, she stuck to it and stayed at the porcelain for another 39 years.
After learning how to burnish tableware, things like plates, cups and jugs, Stella moved to the ornamental side of things. Royal Worcester was famous for its models and figurines, and they required some very tricky burnishing.
A lady called Mrs. Harris taught Stella how to do it.
There was all this ornamental mounted up, so she took on 3 of us to learn us the ornamental, and we worked up the top end of the room, up the far end, and she sat with us. You started on the little painted fruit, and you gradually went up to the bigger things. Then I started doing Henry VIII. He was stood up on a plinth, and you had to pick out the moulding with your agate stone, bring out the gold. Quite tricky because I'm no drawer, but I like doing it. Yeah.
Can you remember any other specific models that you did in those early days?
There's the military officers, weren't they? Admirals we did, the Scotch Guard, Sir Walter Raleigh, Edward I. I think the Queen was the worst, Queen Elizabeth, because she had these big things at the back, like it's supposed to have been like lace. And she had her orb in her one hand and her sceptre in the other. And you had to keep your eye on the orb and the sceptre, because the sceptre was up over her shoulder. And if you touched it with your thumb, which I have done, it'd snap off. So you had to turn it round and think all the time where you're putting your fingers. Yeah, I've snapped a few off.
I'll never look at china ornaments in the same way again. I'll be checking out the details and seeing if any of the fragile bits got broken.
I wonder if you got told off if you accidentally broke a bit.
Let's turn to Dave and his job. We found his job just as intriguing, as we'd never thought about how difficult it might be to pack china.
Here's a bit about him.
My first job was in the post room. That was sending parcels out and shipping things and one thing or other. And that was because I went down for an interview for another job, didn't get it. They must have liked the way I appeared, I suppose. And then I got a phone call to say that this other job was going. Would I accept it? And I just wanted to go, and that was it.
Dave explained why he wanted to work at the Royal Worcester.
Well, the wife worked there. That's what started it off, basically, was the fact that she was happy. We'd had very, very little wages as far as that goes. And it was a lot better money than I was getting at butchering. So it came just at the right time, and I loved it ever since.
So he met Stella before he worked at the factory?
And Stella helped him decide where to work.
Dave started in the packing house in 1974, and we were amazed to hear that in those days china was still packed in barrels.
I thought that's what they used in Tudor times.
Now, when I first of all went there, our packing house, as far as export went, always packed in casks, like vinegar barrels and wine barrels and everything like that. And they always packed in wood wool. Well, wood wool used to come in like a bale of hay, and the first thing they'd have to do was throw a bucket of water over it because of the dust that would come out when they cut it. But it was absolutely incredible to watch the amount of items that they could get into a cask to go abroad, and one thing or other was out of this world.
Wow, that seems fascinating.
A large part of Dave's job was picking and packing, kind of what people might do in an Amazon warehouse today. But when there was a new model or a special commission, it was Dave's job to make sure it was packed properly.
Every time they bought a model out, or a figurine, for instance, the box had to be designed to do it. I mean, the post people, if you send figurines, the smaller figurines by post, which you could do a lot of them, you could send painted fruit by post. Well, you had to get a white one from somewhere or other. There was a set of wooden stairs out of the back of the rich room, in which case you'd carton it up like you thought it would be okay, roll it down the stairs so as if the postman dropped it and all this carry on. You could prove to the postman like it was safe when it left you, and it was their fault.
What was the hardest thing you ever had to pack?
There's one in the museum, and it's a lorikeet, and I have never ever come across anything like that in all my life. They wanted to do God knows how many of them. I think they did about 2. And the Doughty Bird shop brought one up. We had a long bench along the one wall because you couldn't just sort of stack them anyway. And put this lorikeet down, and it had stamens on the flowers, and 13 stamens fell off just by putting it on the bench. And we did get one to a firm called Orifers in Australia. Whether they sold it or not, I don't know. At one time they hadn't sold it, but they couldn't send it back because they couldn't repack it.
I had no idea that packing was such a specialist job.
I think we saw the lorikeet Dave was talking about in the museum. It's really beautiful, but I can imagine why it was so hard to pack. There are hundreds of tiny delicate petals and stamens, all made of porcelain. You should go and have a look for it at the museum.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for in our podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our highlights from Stella and Dave's recordings. If you would like to hear their full interviews, then go and check out the archives at the Museum of Royal Worcester.
This might be the end of our episode, but it's just the beginning for Dexter's and Harry's,
where you will find out about a gilder named John Masters in the 7th episode of our podcast series.
so make sure you don't miss out.
Because history has more to it than first meets the eye.
Thanks for listening.
Goodbye for now.
Have a great rest of your day, and just remember, you could even make history.